Hey, what's up, everybody? We're back. First time, 2 weeks in a row. It's been a long time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we're going to be here a long time. Welcome back, everybody. We decided that we had a really good idea of what we're going to record on, so that makes this season 3, episode 7. There you go. I like it. 7.
Math.
Yeah. Well, hey, I saw this thing the other day, completely off topic, where they were saying, like, if you ask a guy to hold up 3 fingers, right, he'll either do this, right, or he'll do this, right? He'll never do this, which I thought was really interesting because I was thinking to myself, I was like, how do I hold up 3? And I was like, I usually hold up like this, right, for like basketball, like shooting the 3, right? Exactly. So, but anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have a really cool topic to talk about. Shout out to Sasquatch, otherwise known as Jeff McLaughlin, who lives in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and he travels to Quincy Middle School every single year. He makes the pilgrimage to do Connect the Dots. We got some forget-me-nots. Barker has his forget-me-nots at school on his desk, or on a shelf, right?
The shelf of good things.
The shelf of good things. I like it. So anyway, he was at my house and he was telling me about this camp that a school invited him to go to with their high schoolers, and it was called the Washington Family Ranch, I think.
Family camp.
Family camp. Thank you. And it's put on. It's a Young Life. The Christian group owns the camp, but he was with the high school principal, and they borrowed an ATV, drove up into the hills, and they saw these A-frame cabins. And these A-frame cabins have a history that I think many people in the state of Oregon would prefer not to remember. And that is because they belonged to the great city, as those followers would call it, of Rajneeshpuram.
Yeah, this was news to me when Turner talked to me and says, "Have you ever heard about this?" And I was like sitting there thinking, I'm like, there's been a couple of, there was a time in American history where, Waco and Jonestown wasn't in America, but
Guyana.
Shoot, what's the one that happened in Idaho? What am I thinking? It's the man, the wife, and the kid. And
I know what you're talking about.
Ruby Ridge. Yeah, that sounds good.
I'll fact check you while you're still going.
Okay. But anyway, I did a little research and give a huge shout out for this episode too. If you have not watched, it's on Netflix. It's Wild Wild Country. There's a docu-series about this group of people, as well as to the Oregonian who reported on this when it happened and has a 20-part series that you can go through and read. That's where you look at words and read them when they're in more than 10-second bites, you young little millennials. But what we're talking about is a group of people that they were either referred to as the Rajneeshis or sannyasins, right? I look at it and I'm trying to remember how to pronounce it in the appropriate vernacular, not in just I'm gonna English the poop out of this.
Hey, by the way, quick check. Ruby Ridge Doomsday Cult. You are correct.
Yeah, we know stuff. All kinds of useless stuff, which is why we started this.
Yep.
To learn more useless stuff and share it with you.
Yep.
For free.
Yep. That's what we do.
So this whole thing was started by a guy in India. And it kind of has... Turner and I had this conversation when we started this. We're like, well, what were they really based in a particular religion? Or, was there a foundation that was similar to something before they went off and made this into a cult? And we had a conversation about, cults kind of makes people feel bad.
Yeah.
Generally has a negative connotation, which it doesn't technically have to.
Right.
I guess you could say.
I feel like Jonestown makes it a gives the negative connotation, and from then on, it's always going to have one. So,
new mission: make a friendly cult.
Good luck.
We have cookies and T-shirts, but
a lot of people do that. Just don't drink the root beer.
Yeah, I was gonna say no Kool-Aid. Yeah. No tracksuits.
Yeah,
but it was started by a guy who went by the name Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which I believe that Sri Rajneesh was just the area that where his ashram or his that's kind of like a hermitage, right? Or like his
compound, basically. Is the easiest way.
Like monastery, right?
Oh,
place of enlightenment.
Yes, I like that.
And so it comes from India. So there's a lot of the verbiage is taken from Hinduism. So even the term sannyasin is a state through there's 5 stages of enlightenment, and I apologize because we are not experts in Eastern religions. And so like there's this stage where like you kind of there's a lot of similarity. There's similarities between Hinduism and Buddhism. And so like kind of like it's the stage where you are kind of like the non-materialist kind of like monk. You think about like the Buddhist monks that are just traveling around with like just have very bare bones kind of stuff. And that's where the term sannyasin originates. And so Bhagwan, or Osho as he was called later in his life, discuss why the branding difference later. But anyway, they kind of look at this, and he uses a lot of and then people would change their names to Hindi names, like from whatever their legal names were. They would,
right.
I don't know if they would necessarily legally change their names to that, but that was the name. They were aliases, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think they ever did. When you're watching the documentary, they talk about how people would go and they'd go by their given names in certain areas, and then come back and use their Hindi names for in the commune.
Yeah, within the confines of Rajneeshpuram.
Yep.
So Rajneeshpuram is was built. It used to be the Big Muddy Ranch. It's 65,000 acres of beautiful eastern Oregon, which is not that dissimilar than eastern Washington.
Yep.
So a whole lot of box canyon and a whole lot of tumbleweed.
Mm-hmm.
They bought it in the 80s because they were getting pushback in India from the Hindu community because they didn't feel that the teachings of Bhagwan were like appropriate, like weren't doing justice to like, Hinduism. And so they buy this ranch, the Big Muddy Ranch near Antelope, Oregon, which if you've never heard of Antelope, Oregon,
neither has
nobody blames you. It's about 75 miles southeast of the Dalles. So it's literally in that stretch of highway where you're just trying to go as fast as possible to get to Boardman or get to the Dalles from one to the other. Kind of by Rufus, which is a pretty fun name for a city, but
one of the one of the other big pushbacks was that the Bhagwan, or Osho, and again we'll explain the rebranding later. He actually he pushes no institutionalized religions. Well, Hinduism, obviously an institutionalized religion that actually penetrates, not the right word, but it is in their government, like India's government. Hinduism plays a major role. There isn't a separation of church and state as much as we consider it in the United States. And so one of the big things is he's outspoken about this, and he's preaching that no institutionalized religion is correct. And of course, when your government is based on a religion or has a religion around it, right, that is going to create conflict.
So this group buys this ranch. And initially they say that they're going to come out and they're going to ranch. They're going to revitalize, reclaim, kind of like the Bureau of Reclamation in the Columbia Basin.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody's kind of cool with it at first. They dress weird because like they all wear red or shades of orange. I didn't wear my red today on purpose. I was like, it'll look weird if we're wearing red. I don't want people to like.
I purposely wore that because they do wear red in their cult.
Yeah. because it symbolizes the rising sun,
Yeah.
I believe is what it was. But anyway, so you have these people that have very like counterculture ideas. So they also believe in like they don't necessarily ascribe to the ideas of like marriage or family structure. You know what I mean? They were very free love, which when you're moving into Central Oregon, which is very conservative politically, it was a big change for people.
Yep.
And I think at its maximum, they estimate there was 2,000 people living.
I saw 7.
Oh, well, I think they mean, well, because when there was the elections, they tried to bring in the share a home program. They would literally go into towns and like across the country and like load up homeless people and bring them to Rajneeshpuram. Like,
yeah. So we'll get to that. So anyway, sorry. To give you context though, like so he was saying like 2,000 people. Antelope, the town, the closest town to Rajneeshpuram, was about 60 people. And the way it was described, especially in the documentary by the people who live there, is it was a place for people to retire to where they could actually afford to buy a home. And it was about 60 people. There was one cafe. The locals described they took turns being mayor of the town, like just because it had to be done and nobody really wanted to keep doing it. And so you can see, obviously, when a new neighbor moves in with 2,000 members of their family, yeah, it causes quite an uproar.
And so like it becomes pretty apparent really quick that they're not just building a ranch. Like they're building like they're building a city, and they do. Like they incorporate. The state of Oregon says if you have 150 people living in a spot, you can apply to be incorporated as a city in the state of Oregon. Right? So I mean that probably goes back to like the 1800s when you were like lucky enough to get you in, you know, that many families within earshot of each other. But they incorporate and they start, you know, I mean they do it as a way of almost like trying to combat the feelings and animosity against them so they can protect themselves is the claim.
Yeah.
They
get left like, alone because they're their own town, so they don't affect other towns.
Yeah, and because of the politics in Antelope, they start buying up all the extra property or the open property in Antelope too, so they can exert influence there. And that's where I think some of like where a lot of the problems stem from. And like so attention was brought by what was it, Bill Bowerman, who was a track coach at the University of Oregon, who owned a ranch kind of adjacent to Big Muddy. And so like when they came in and they started like seeing them like build like septic systems and like, you know, you're not building a ranch, you're building a city. And like that's not what the land is, that's not what it's like zoned for, what the land use is for.
Yeah.
And so him and a group called the Thousand Friends of Oregon try and fight the establishment of Rajneeshpuram, and it starts kicking off this legal battle. And at this point, like the Bhagwan has taken a vow of silence and isn't like speaking publicly like he was when he was in India. And so he's just kind of like hanging out. And he had appointed this woman, Ma Anand Sheila, which goes, a lot of people just call her Sheila in the film. And again, it's not her, I guess, her birth name.
Right.
Right. It's a name that she gives herself once she becomes part of this group. And she really becomes, she's the head secretary.
Yep.
To the Bhagwan. And so she really becomes like the mouthpiece,
the public face.
And yeah, the public face and like the de facto leader of day-to-day operations of this city. And it becomes very contentious with other people in Wasco County, which goes all the way to the Dalles in Oregon. You know, because they're coming over and they're trying to, rightly so, they're citing, well, like it's freedom of religion. We have our religion is different. So we came to America because you guys have freedom of religion. And like even the Bhagwan, he's quoted as saying like the Constitution of the United States is like one of the greatest documents because it has such a liberal policy around religion. And, you know, they start buying guns and things like that. Like they do things that normal Americans do, but because their beliefs are so incongruent with kind of the culture of Central Oregon, it starts sending up a lot of red flags. And I guess, long story short, evidence comes out eventually that they were. Okay, go ahead.
So hold on. So we gotta just. So basically, what happens is that kind of just to fill her in. So I'm gonna make the story a little bit longer. We had a bet that this video would be less than 20 minutes, and I didn't think it would be. But anyway, basically what ends up happening is they take over the town of Antelope. The town of Antelope tries to disincorporate itself, meaning that they try and end themselves as a town so that the Rajneeshis or the Sannyasins can't take over their town. Well, by the time that the election is held, there's enough Sannyasins to beat out the people of Antelope in their election, and so they stay incorporated. Well, then they hold an election for mayor and the city council, and one of the things they do is they actually leave one guy from Antelope, who's I think he's the current Antelope mayor now, according to that video, or he was in 2018 when that documentary was made. But he's the one city council member that's not a sannyasin. Obviously, he has no say. He's outvoted every single time, and everything like that. Well, that solved their problem in the area. But then what ended up happening was there was going to be an election for the county. And again, one of the things Barker and I have talked about with elections is the biggest impact you feel in elections are local elections, right? They're not the sexy elections. Nobody cares about them until they realize that they care about them. And then this is the people that run your community. So there, I think, are 2 county commissioner spots that are available in Wasco County. And it starts off with the Sannyasins aren't going to put up a candidate. They keep saying that. And finally, Sheila comes out and says, yeah, we're going to run our own candidate. Well, they start this program called, I think you call it Share a Home program, right? Where they actually go out to major cities in the United States and collect homeless people to move to their area, where they tell them like, hey, you're going to get fed. We're going to have you clothes, right? So they're looking good. Like it's a big community service. We're welcoming you to our community. But they have an a side plan, and that is to, in the state of Oregon, and I'm sure it's probably pretty similar to this time, if you're a resident, if you live in Oregon for 20 days, you can register to vote. And so they have this big plan to bring all these homeless people in and have them live there 20 days and then register to vote in Wasco County and to win the election, which again, a little underhanded, right? Than just helping out the community. And so anyway, they find that the county clerk says, actually, I'm worried about these elections being truthful and like these people's actual intention to vote. So they actually suspend all voter registration for Wasco County. So all these homeless people they brought in are now not helpful to them. And so they come up with another plan. And that plan is actually noted, I believe, as the largest bio attack in United States history. And that is they breed cultures of salmonella, and then they go around the Dalles, and start spreading it on salad bars. And so people are getting sick. And I think, do you remember the number of how many people get sick? Nobody dies. That's like the important part about it.
I think I want to say the numbers that I saw were in the upper like 700s, close to 800 people got sick.
Yeah, 750 is the number that stuck out in my mind. But yeah, so they end up getting sick because their goal, Wasco County is not very big in terms of number of residents. And so their goal was they were trying to plan if they could sicken enough people in a day to make it work. And so they were testing the salmonella drop on salad bars, but the thought was they would drop it in the water supply.
Well, then it became bigger, and they were going to try and drop it in like the water supply of like Portland, and then they said it was eventually going to be bigger than that, and maybe against, it started getting really aggressive at the end. But yeah.
But anyway, one of the things was that Barger mentioned they had guns and were militant, and that happened after they had a hotel in Portland that got bombed by an Islamic militant group in 1983. Again, I don't think anyone died from that one, right? But it was a deliberate attack on them. So their response, instead of saying, having the police help and try and figure out who it was and all that stuff, it was, hey, we need to arm ourselves. And they had significant amounts of automatic weapons, and semi-automatic weapons to defend themselves. And the ranchers that lived next to them could hear them shooting almost daily.
Well, and like they would, because they were incorporated as a city, like they could technically legally say that it was like a law enforcement group
Yep.
for their city, for Rajneeshpuram. And like this is where, like, for the longest time, like this is where I think a lot of the people will claim that this is where the FBI or the government starts to conspire against the Rajneeshis, and is like, we need to get them out of America. But there's also accounts that to bypass visas, they were ended up being brought up on charges of, well, there was attempted poisoning, attempted assassination, because at one point there was a plot to assassinate a district attorney, Charles Turner, no relation, I think.
Nope.
As well as the Oregon Attorney General
Yep.
at the time. And then they also later stab and try and poison like the personal doctor, girlfriend, and I think the dentist of the Bhagwan.
Yep.
Because they thought those people were keeping him away from, I guess, doing what he should have been doing.
Yeah, but poisoning him too, like giving him drugs to recreational drug use. So.
Yeah, and so like, where was I at with this? But
the other charge is immigration fraud.
Oh, immigration fraud. They would take two people from the commune and send them out to like Seattle or like Texas, or like, you know, it didn't necessarily have to be in even Oregon. They would send them out to a different place. They would live under their I guess birth names, right?
Yep.
Their legal names. They would cohabitate and essentially go through the process of, one of them would be a citizen, the other one would be a non-citizen, and they would go through the process of getting married and obtaining, you know, like I don't know. Yeah, green card.
Yep.
For the person who was a non-citizen, so that they could be to bypass the visa process.
Yep.
So that people weren't overstaying their visas. And then when they would return back to Rajneeshpuram, they would go back and live with who their real partners were.
Yep.
Which is fraud. Like, and it was a planned thing. Like, people were given orders.
Yeah.
And in the documentary, they even talk about, there's these women that go down to like and buy guns. They're given like essentially a shopping list and say, go to these states that have liberal gun policies, buy guns, bring them back up here, and then we'll distribute them across the compound the way we see fit. And so after the attempted killings of like the people in the entourage close to the Bhagwan, that's where Sheila and her kind of
posse.
Yeah, like, and there's a lot of female,
Her inner circle.
The inner circle. They jump on a plane and they actually flee to Germany.
Yep.
Like, there's like deuces one day, get on a plane and they're out. And at that point, this is where like the Bhagwan kind of comes out of his period of silence and says, this isn't the stuff that was done that kind of is given their religion or their cult religion, whatever, a bad name. He's like, it's not really what I'm about. Like, because like he says it's a religionless religion. Like, but he goes by these terms. Like, Bhagwan is a teacher, and then he later changes to Osho to try and distance himself from all of these bad things that happened.
Yep.
And Osho is a term that was used, I think, to refer to like in Japanese Zen for like almost like a teacher, like a Buddha.
Master, yeah.
Yeah. And so like he comes out and starts essentially talking against Sheila, lets the government in to do investigations, kind of. Like, they're not 100% compliant, but it turns out that there's evidence of the salmonella, like where they had the cultures of salmonella. She was a lot of the buildings were bugged and they were recording people without consent.
Yep.
You know, and all this stuff. And then they start pushing on, well, the immigration fraud, and they're trying to get Bhagwan out of America.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, like, I think it's in 85.
Yep. In
the middle of the night, he jumps on a plane that's leaving for, like, I think it was somewhere in the Caribbean.
Bermuda.
There we go. That's in the Caribbean. Not wrong.
No, it's Bermuda, and the only reason it's Bermuda is because if he gets to Bermuda, he can't be extradited.
Yeah, they land to refuel in, I think it was Charlotte, right?
Well, there's two planes. They land in Salt Lake and Pueblo, Colorado, and then they're like tracking them. The government's tracking them, the FAA, and then they land. Yeah, and then they land in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they're waiting for them.
And that's where they essentially take him into custody, and they essentially get him to agree to a plea bargain where he says he'll leave the United States and go back to India.
Yeah.
And like he tried to go to a number of other countries, and a bunch of other countries were, yeah, we're like, we don't want you here either. So like go back to where you came from.
Yep.
And so like with Sheila gone, who was like the actual like person running Rajneeshpuram, and then with the departure of Bhagwan, like the community falls apart because like the whole idea was to, part of this cult was to be around, like to be in the presence of the Bhagwan.
Yeah.
And so if the Bhagwan's not present, you can't be in his presence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so with that, I think it's by 1988, like it's essentially gone downhill. There's nobody living there. Antelope's back to looking like antelope for the most part. And then the Bhagwan changes his name to Osho to try and distance himself from all of the bad press. There's still an Osho international like teaching organization.
Yep.
And they really focus on meditation. And he was really big on, he had like this five step, what they call it, dynamic meditation, where like the first step is you like, just like whatever your emotions are, you let them out, like scream, cry, like hit stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the second step is you jump up and down with your hands above your head. And like every time your feet hit the ground, you say like, who?
Yep.
You know what I mean? Or no, step one was hyperventilate.
Yeah.
Step two was let the emotions out. Step three was jump up and down. Step four was silence for like 15 minutes.
Yep.
And then the final 15 minutes was like a dance of like jubilation.
Yep.
And I think that's the piece of the Rajneeshi beliefs or the sannyasin beliefs that people are holding on to, is the meditation piece.
Yeah.
I think that's the part that people that really, that are, you know, still believe in kind of like the Osho beliefs and stuff. That's the part that they're really holding on to. And they talk about managing stress and stuff like that. Stuff is a little bit more mainstream. But yeah, like Turner said earlier, like the ranch goes away. It's bought by a rich guy, Dennis Washington, and buys it for $3.6 million in 1991.
Yep. And it was valued, I think, at over that in terms of all the outbuildings and everything like that. It was valued way more. And he got it. He was the only one who, I think, was a bidder for it, I think.
Yeah. Well, to put it in perspective, there was a restaurant that they owned in Portland that they sold, that when they bought it they bought it for $450,000 and sold it for $45,000.
Yeah.
So like at that point, it wasn't necessarily about making money.
Yeah.
Which is kind of one of the other crazy things about, not crazy thing, but one of the interesting things about this is that normally a lot of people who sannyasin belief is like to get rid of earthly possessions, but the Bhagwan like drove around in Rolls Royces and had, I think, what do we say, like 85, right? And they used to joke that they wanted to give him 365 of them so that he have a different Rolls Royce for every day of the year.
When they sold him, so he only rode in a Rolls Royce when he was going around the compound, like he never left the compound. And so most of those Rolls Royces, when they were sold off, had less than, they said, 1,000 kilometers on them. So.
And a lot of the people that joined this group were actually college educated people. Like, and again, it's not these, it was kind of that counterculture. They were taking the people who were trying to, like, you know what I mean, like fight back against what the traditional American, like, I don't know, like family structure was and stuff like that, or what expectations were.
Yeah.
And so like they would come and bring their money and put their money into this organization, into the Rajneesh like organization. And then it was a matter of, you know, things were being done for them. People were working and like people were feeling really good about it. Like it was good for the people that were there for the most part. Like a lot of people talked very positively about it.
Yeah.
But like kind of like the political undertones of like what was going on kind of behind all the scenes. And a lot of them in the documentary, even that way, like felt that way, where it was like, it was supposed to be about openness and no secrets. And then all of a sudden you find out that Sheila and her inner circle have been doing all this stuff like on the down low. Then it's like, whoa. And it kind of shakes your it shakes your belief in what was it really what we thought it was, because
Yeah.
it really isn't looking like it was. Um, and then yeah, like eventually, like Rajneeshpuram doesn't exist anymore. It's gone back to being, now it's the Washington Family Ranch,
Mhm.
or Washington Family Camp, which still has part of it called Big Muddy Ranch. And then there's two different youth camps. One is called Canyon, and one is called Creekside. One's for high schoolers, one's for middle schoolers. They're huge
Water
complexes.
park in them.
Yeah, there's an amazing water park. I'll put the visual up here for you.
Yeah. That's right.
Um, looks like
Mhm.
you're going to like Atlantis, one of the Atlantis resorts, like in
Yeah.
the Bahamas. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Cool. So what was interesting, what drew me to this though, and I think you had this conversation just because we're both history teachers and stuff like that, and we study is it was really interesting to see governments take when something they didn't like was in place, right? Like I was interested in the fact of like where one of the things they were talking about was they need to unincorporate because there was no separation of church and state, right? Because again, like obviously at Rajneeshpuram, the religion of that fell pretty heavily and obviously dictated a lot of what the government did. So there was no separation between the government and the religion. And the lawyer who actually, and I don't remember his name, both his given name and his Sannyasin name, but he lives in Sequim, Washington now. And apparently he's writing a book on his experiences there and stuff like that. Not sure if it's out yet. But he talked about, he said, well, what about Salt Lake City? Right? Where you can make a strong argument that people who are elected to the government in Salt Lake City are members of the Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, right? So what's the difference between my religion and that? And actually what ended up happening in that court case, even though Rajneeshpuram had pretty much closed and had been disintegrated, dissolved to what it was, the state of Oregon said that no, like that lawsuit where you wanted them to be unincorporated is actually did not hold in court. They said the state of Oregon, as much as they don't like them, this is not a thing. You can have this. That could have been a town. Obviously, it was all for naught because at that point the Bhagwan's back in India, and the town is fizzled out. So, but I thought that was interesting to have that kind of conversation about stuff like that. There was some interesting First Amendment stuff that popped up, and I was like, hmm.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those interesting ones that just because it's unpalatable to other people, and one of the big things that the documentary focused on was the idea of like the free love concepts,
Yeah,
or like,
absolutely.
what I mean, like, the other people, because there was a documentary that came out very close during that time period, I think, that was filmed by a German reporter,
Yeah, who
of
had
like
been
the dynamic meditation, and people were just like, whoa, there's, people are naked and dancing around, like, this is not okay, this is not, this is not what we do. And I
yeah,
think that was a big portion of it, like, and it was really interesting too, because like the Rajneeshis, like Sheila and them, they went through and they said, what what are the rules? And as long as we don't violate like the Constitution or state laws, like, what can we do within the boundaries of
mhm,
the rule? I mean, it's almost like, I think about like sports, like football, like, until there's a rule that says you can't do something,
yeah,
you can do it. And then people go, yeah, that's not really what we thought that was going to be. We'll make a rule that says, you can't run out of bounds and like run behind the bench and then come back in bounds, catch a pass.
yeah,
And so I think that was a lot of kind of what happened in it. That was kind of one of the other things that people didn't had trouble like trying to understand about the teachings of Bhagwan, is that he was very um paradoxical. What I mean? Like he would kind of contradict himself, and it was like just kind of like whatever was in the moment was kind of like the right answer. And
yep,
so that's very much how they played politics. Was, well, we can bring people in. They only have to be here for so long, so let's bring them in. And
yep,
then as soon as like the homeless people, they're like, oh, they're gonna close down voter registration, they kick them all out into the surrounding communities. What I mean?
yep.
There's this
In Portland, dropping off. Yeah,
giant influx of homeless people,
yeah,
because they weren't serving the purpose for them anymore. And they weren't as devoted to the ideas of, they
hmm
weren't Rajneeshis,
right.
like the other people that were there.
And
I think if you,
there were
so go
some
ahead.
people who did convert in that sense. Convert, I use convert loosely, But there were some people who bought into the idea and continued that, and they were allowed to stay. But there were some people who, like, they talked about, Sheila almost got killed by a guy who was mentally unstable, probably, and had led to probably his homelessness. And so at that point it was like, yeah, like, these people are not necessarily a part of our group. They don't support the same ideals that we do, right? We need to make some changes to it, which also led to drugging of the what do they call them? They call them street people,
Mhm.
in the documentary, and like literally put it in their beer. Everyone got 2 beers a day, and so they put drugs in their beer to like keep them calm, like sedatives, to make sure that they were sedated. So
Yeah, and then to put it in perspective, Sheila was convicted
yep,
and did serve time in jail, and now runs kind of a convalescent home in Switzerland, I believe.
yeah,
Um, but her mentality when they interviewed her for the documentary was very much that she has served her punishment so that she doesn't view herself as a criminal anymore because
yeah.
she's paid her dues, is kind of the way that she thinks about it. And she attributes that to more of a European thought rather than the American thought, that where it's almost like once you're a convict for life. And that's, it's like branding a thumb in the old British
Yeah.
system.
Well, and it was interesting too. What I thought was it kind of came full circle, because she talks about, she meets the Bhagwan when she's 16 and agrees to follow him for the rest of his life at like 17, and then works her way up through the system, becomes his secretary, that whole deal. When it comes to securing the land in America, she secures it with her husband, actually buys it, for $5.45 million or something like that. But anyway, what's interesting is when she's at that convalescent home, right? She's like, I take all those lessons that I learned from the Bhagwan. She's like, all these people, right? Society has not, granted them the I guess civility is the word I'm looking for. Like, they haven't treated them correctly. And so she's like, we cook together, right? We eat together, we dance together, we laugh together. Like, so all those things that Rajneeshpuram, that were like the good things that drew people there, she now continues in her life after all of this. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was really full circle. And again, like we're saying, in America, we have this idea of, when somebody's guilty of a crime, that kind of hangs with them for the rest of their life. Yeah, they're a great person, but they did this. Remember that? They did that. Where it's like, and again, she attributes it to Switzerland, is who she uses the reference for, because that's where she lives. She says, once you in Switzerland, when you served your time, you're done. That's it. You paid your debt. You're a clean slate. Here we go. And I thought that was really, really interesting to see her in her final moment. And it was like, because you've been judging her this whole time, watching the documentary, you're like, you're not a very nice person. Like, you're willing to do things that are really horrible. Like, you are saying these things to, da da da, just to instigate. And then you see her at the end where she's taking care of these people, and you're like, wow, right? Like, she did care. She really just, like, she may have done evil things, but she's claimed she's paid her debt, and she's trying to help people. And that's always what she's been trying to do. She's always been trying to help people, just through the wrong method. A lot.
And I think you could argue that the Bhagwan would say that, like, she lost her way. Like, I mean, it was almost one of those things where, like, because there was a power structure that rose up and I mean, that's kind of like the danger, is that once you get a certain number of people together, it requires structure
Yep.
and it requires power and leadership. And that potentially is what, I mean, like, got in the way of
Yeah.
the teachings, was that it became more of this oppositional, it became more about the fight against the non-Rajneeshi people to protect the Rajneeshi, like, for
Yeah.
them to live in the, I mean, it became more about being combative than it did about
Yeah.
focusing on just living out in your little box canyon the way that you want.
Yeah.
So,
Really interesting topic. Highly recommend. Again, we don't get paid by Netflix at all. We're not paid by anybody at all. We pay each other in compliments. Barker, you look great tonight.
thanks.
And but I mean, yeah, it's Wild Wild Country, right?
Wild Wild Country. Yep.
Yeah, Wild Wild Country, Netflix. Good 6-part series, worth every minute. But be careful, because obviously it has nudity in it. It has very bad language, and things like that. So if you're watching it, or if you're watching around kids, understand what you're going to see. So
Yeah. I mean, it's just I think that's what makes it so interesting is that it's this group that follows a guru who's supposed to be like, when you think about gurus and you think about like, kind of like has those, it looks like Buddhism, looks like Hinduism, which are generally very for the most part, we kind of, the stereotype is non-combative.
right.
And then to hear that there's these people that are being super hyper violent, and it's almost one of I think that's what just makes it so hard to try and pin down, like, what is it? Because it feels at that time, it was just kind of like, and I think that was the viewpoint of people in Antelope and in Oregon was that, well, they just kind of do whatever they need to do at the moment. Like they don't really have a base. You're not really sure what the beliefs are and what their foundation is. And so that's what kind of makes it scary in another way is that you're not sure where they're going to go. They're unpredictable.
Yep.
So I thought, yeah, it was totally something that I was unaware of. I mean, it's not that far. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's only about 3-hour drive from where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
If I wanted to go visit, which I don't think is high on the priority list for me and the wife.
Not right now. No. So, all right. Well, Bark, anything else?
No, I think we're good. I mean,
Right.
the conflict in Ukraine is still going on.
Yeah.
They're still fighting.
We're starting to see more atrocities too, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's starting to border more on, at what point when you open up non-combatant corridors and then shell the corridors, does it become a war crime? Or when you target hospitals and schools,
Yep.
even if you say on state media in your country you're not doing it, but the rest of the world sees you doing it.
Yep.
It's kind of like a little kid going, "You can't see me."
Yeah.
We see you, Putin.
Yeah, we see you. One other thing, totally had a brain fart. Oh, congratulations to the RA Long Jacks, 6th place finish, correct?
5th place,
Fifth
the
place
best
finish.
in state since 1953.
Fantastic. So congratulations to the Quincy Jackrabbits. They made their first state showing in a long time. I think since they
About
took
2000.
Yeah, I think so. So nice job, Jackson, on both sides of the mountains, and looking forward to seeing what those spring sports are bringing around. So until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
We're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Be safe.
And be well.